Hey guys, my name is Dice Rollin, and today we're going to be taking a look at a classic British horror movie that has been touted as the scariest haunted house film, based on the novel The Haunting of Hill House by the late Shirley Jackson and written by the late Nelson Gidding. The Haunting was directed by the late Robert Weiss and was released on September 18th, 1963. A group of strangers are assembled to prove or disprove the existence of the paranormal in a house with a tragic history. It frightened many audiences during its theatrical release, but was only a moderate success box office-wise, with critics being mixed. Since then, it has become a classic in ghost and haunting movies, as well as, in more recent years, garnered a spot on lists of LGBTQA+ horror films. So without further ado, this is my review of The Haunting. The movie starts off with some narration and mood setting by Dr. John Markway, played by the late Richard Johnson.
Scandal, murder, insanity, suicide. It had everything I wanted.
Now, why does that sound like what I would say to a realtor when looking for a house? He tells the history of Hill House and the many deaths that took place here, including the owner's wife, Mrs. Crane, who died before setting foot into the house, Mr. Crane's second wife, who fell down the stairs, Mr. Crane himself, who drowned on a boating accident miles away, Abigail, Crane's daughter, who died after not being heard by the village girl she took in, and the village girl who hung herself years later. Hill House currently resides in the possession of Mrs. Sanderson, played by the late Fay Compton, from whom Markway convinces to allow him to rent Hill House. He wants to stay there with some volunteers in order to conduct experiments to uncover whether or not there's paranormal happenings within the house. With a list of people already prepared, we meet one such member, Eleanor Lance, played by the late Julie Harris, as she pleads with her family to let her take the car for this trip. Despite the fact that her sister refuses, Eleanor still takes the car. You see, she wants to get away, not just for a while, but permanently, as she feels her whole life has been dedicated to others and their wishes. After a bit of a drive, Eleanor arrives at Hill House and has to persuade Mr. Dudley, played by the late Valentine Dial, to let her in as she's the first to arrive. Upon reaching the house, she has a distinct feeling that it's alive and watching her. She's shown to her room by Mrs. Dudley, played by the late Rosalie Crutchley, who makes sure to tell her that once it starts to get dark, she and her husband are out this bitch. Soon after, another guest arrives, Theodora, played by Claire Bloom. She and Eleanor bond pretty quickly. Eleanor and Theo go exploring and get lost. Thankfully, Dr. Markway appears to welcome them and introduce himself. Making their way to the dining room, we meet our final guest, who also happens to be the nephew of Mrs. Sanderson, Luke, played by Russ Tamblyn, and this makes up our group of paranormal researchers. As the good doctor explains, there would have been 6 total, but the rest chickened out because of the stories attached to Hill House.
What stories?
You mean you didn't investigate before you came here?
No.
Oh, well, you're in the right place for a horror movie then. See, I'm not arriving at a place without Googling it first. Though, since this is a highly haunted location, I can't guarantee that would deter me. Over some salmon, Markway explains exactly why they're all in Hill House. Apparently, Theo and Eleanor, and those who had initially signed up, were chosen due to having some connection to the supernatural. Theo has ESP, and Eleanor had been dead this whole time, living her life as a ghost, and just doesn't know it yet. Nah, I'm joking. She experienced stones falling on her house for 3 days when she was 10.
What?
I like my explanation better. There's further discussion over what could cause hauntings and such, before everyone heads to their rooms.
You mustn't expect every night to be Halloween.
Eleanor wakes up later that night to a pounding on the walls, automatically assuming it's her deceased mother, until Theo calls for her. Both women are trapped within the room as the noise intensifies. Once it's over, Eleanor opens the door to find Markway and Luke walking around. Apparently, they didn't hear any of what Eleanor and Theo just had, but they did have an odd experience of their own in the form of a phantom dog in the halls. Markway comes to the conclusion that whatever forces there may be within Hill House seem to want to separate them. The following morning, over breakfast, Markway and Eleanor have a little chat. She explains why, despite everything thus far, she's still eager to stay. It's because her adult life, up to about 2 months ago, was spent being the caregiver of her bedridden mother. Theo and Luke join them, and he points out something odd in the hallway. Someone, or something, has written "Help Eleanor come home, in chalk on the wall, in immaculate cursive, I must say. It goes without saying that Eleanor doesn't take this very well. But with Theo's distraction and Markway's reassurance, she calms down, once again proving that Eleanor and I would not react the same way. See my name written on the wall of a haunted house? The four tour the house, visiting the garden area and the library, during which Eleanor seems to be far more affected by the house than the others. All the same, she still pleads with Markway to not send her home. So as a compromise, he asks Theo to room with her, so they can both look after each other. That night, Markway discovers a cold spot in the house that happens to be right in front of Abigail's old nursery where she died. That's not the only ghostly activity to happen either.
Whose hand was I holding?
This, combined with the disembodied voices, including a child, disturbs Eleanor quite a lot, to the point where she explains to Markway that she feels responsible for her mother's death, seeing as the night her mother died, Eleanor didn't go to her when she called. Through this admission, Eleanor and Markway seem to get that much closer, which, later on, leads to Theo agitating the both of them. This drama gets interrupted when a car arrives, bringing Grace Markway, played by the late Louise Maxwell, to Hill House. This is yet another blow to Eleanor, of course. Since Markway apparently didn't want to mention he was married, Grace has come to retrieve John, but since he refuses to leave with her, she decides to stay. Not only that, but given her lack of belief in everything that her husband claims to be researching, she specifically wants to stay in the most haunted area of the house, which happens to be Abigail's nursery. Oh, so not only is John married, but he married a petty bitch. Thankfully, John doesn't have a key to that room.
Look.
As previously mentioned, Grace is ignorant and petty as fuck, so she will be sleeping in the nursery. As for everyone else, they're going to be spending the night in the parlor, with John and Luke taking turns ensuring that nothing happens to Grace. Unfortunately, Luke decides to have a little rendezvous with a bottle of alcohol, and the door shuts on all four of them. This is preceded by the knocking Theo and Eleanor heard before, and judging by how easy it is for the ghost to push the door in and out, I guess the house was made by Glad. John immediately wants to go to his wife, but Luke prevents him from doing so. Believing that the house is after her, Eleanor leaves the parlor instead. Upon reaching the nursery, she finds that Grace is nowhere to be seen. While the others search for Grace, Eleanor is really beginning to lose her shit. Wanting to stay in Hill House forever, Eleanor goes to the library and climbs the exceedingly unstable spiral staircase. The others find her and Markway manages to reach her before she does something drastic. However, Eleanor sees a glimpse of Grace in the attic and faints. Markway finally insists that Eleanor leave Hill House, but she argues that it's her Hill House once, and Grace has taken her place. Luke plans to accompany Eleanor to ensure she leaves safely, but when he goes to Markway to get the gate key, she takes off. She loses control of her car to an invisible force, and crashes into a tree, which kills her. This is the same spot where Mrs. Crane died. At the same time, Grace reappears, a bit battered, but otherwise alright. So with a narration from Eleanor herself, the movie ends. The plot of The Haunting is a prime example of a quality ghost/haunted house tale. It's a slow burn that takes its time showing the events, and letting you get to know the characters. It holds a very ominous tone overall, and that enhances once the characters arrive at Hill House. And speaking of characters, Hill House does come across as its own character too, without being cartoonish. The plot is treated with care, and though it's very clearly a horror movie, it relies far more on your perception as the viewer to provide the terror. And that's a smart thing to do. The number of jump scares throughout the film are limited, which means that tension is the emphasis here, rather than cheap scares. I can always appreciate that. Let's talk for a moment about why this film has been placed under the rainbow flag of horror. There were several points throughout watching this where I, as a queer person, had my radar beeping quite loudly. Most of the interactions between Theo and Eleanor are the main examples. Right off the bat upon meeting, Theodore seems to show a good bit of interest in Eleanor, and wants to be close and bond with her. Most of that seems to go beyond just friendship or a sister-like connection, though for the most part Eleanor continually deflects these advances and even gravitates towards John more, which in turn causes Theo to be jealous and even standoffish towards him. Let's keep in mind that Theo apparently has psychic abilities, and even stated that it was easy to pick up on what Eleanor was thinking at any given moment. When Eleanor asks Theo what she's afraid of, she says, "Knowing what I really want," while making direct eye contact with her.
Oh my god, lesbians!
Later on, Eleanor even lashes out at Theo, insinuating that Theo is unnatural, or a mistake of nature. As she said, she'd rather be stupid and innocent than like Theo. Aside from Theo and Eleanor, there's Luke. A specific moment that I caught was when they were all headed to bed, and he asked whether or not the ghost that could potentially pay him a visit was male or female. There was no punchline or quip of disgust towards the concept of it being male. Though Luke voices and shows interest in women, this still stood out to me. Acting is crucial under most circumstances, and here it's even more so. The Haunting is a haunted house film first and foremost, but what pays everything off is whether or not the characters that are involved can hold your interest and make you empathize with them. I'd say everyone did quite well in doing just that. With the four main actors, there's likely to be at least one character that you can relate to. The actors portrayed their characters with enough depth and layers to keep them from being stereotypical or over-the-top caricatures. Julie Harris made you empathize greatly with Eleanor and feel quite sorry for her and everything that she's been through. You can understand why she feels the way she does when compared to what her life has been up to going to Hill House. Claire Bloom is the sort of yin to Eleanor's yang. They play off each other well. Bloom made Theo likable in her own way, while being a stark difference to Eleanor's innocence and frailty. Russ Tamblyn managed to balance the cocksure attitude of Luke with a sarcastic humor. He conveyed moments of assholery, but overall made Luke a fun and an important character. Richard Johnson took up the role of the educated and caring character that was Markway. He ensured that the character was what was needed in a group like this. Calm and steady, but also frantic and unsettled when needed. Given that the entirety of the film is in black and white, it's that much more important for the settings and atmosphere to be strong and defined. As I said, Hill House quickly stood out as its own character. It has a distinct style and look to it that easily comes across as foreboding and ominous. Even when everything is quiet and still, it gives the sense that that doesn't mean that it's safe. It genuinely does feel as if there are shadows lurking around every corner, and the place could be endless. The special effects are extremely limited here. There's no real makeup effects or overlays to speak of. Once again, this is a film that relies heavily on your own mind to conjure the horrors just beyond the door. The score, composed by the late Humphrey Searley, is dreamlike at times, and properly dread-filled other times. It floats in the background while the characters are in the forefront, and should be given your attention. And when all hell breaks loose, it amps everything up. With all that being said, I'm giving The Haunting 6.5 out of 10 bloody thumbs up. While I can't say that I was particularly scared or unsettled by this film, it's not hard at all to see why someone else would be. The first time I watched it, I had trouble understanding why so many people claimed that it was the best haunted house film ever. This being the second time watching The Haunting all the way through, I wouldn't slap such a label on it myself. However, I don't hesitate to call it a true classic haunting movie. It has that old school creepy atmosphere that many of us enjoy. It doesn't mess around and try to seem deeper than it really is. It has a depth to it that has inspired many films and series in the years after its release, such as The Haunting of Hill House, The Haunting of Bly Manor, Rose Red, and more. That's in no small part due to Shirley Jackson's original novel, of course. The Haunting and Hill House's influence on modern horror is easy to see, and while I may not be among its biggest fans, I'm glad that it hasn't been forgotten. I would recommend The Haunting to paranormal enthusiasts, fans of the Haunting series, those who prefer to be scared rather than grossed out, and anyone who enjoys dramatic inner monologue. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like to let me know. Don't forget to leave a comment down below telling me what you think of this movie, and if you have any suggestions for horror movies you'd like to see me review in the future. You can support the channel through my Patreon, where you would get exclusive and early access to videos like this. See you later.
Hill House has stood for 90 years and might stand for 90 more. And we who walk here walk alone.